Hey guys, here we are in HitFilm Pro for 2018. HitFilm Pro will no longer have a version number or be named according to the year. It's just going to be HitFilm Pro. And there are some other implications of this, but we'll talk about those closer to the end of the video. Now, before we get into the first look of the new features, I want to stress that I'm recording this in October of 2017, about a month before the release of the software. I am using a beta pre-release version, and what I discuss here is subject to change or refinement in between my recording date and FX Home releasing the software. So assume that this is not a 100% accurate first look, but we can also probably assume that any changes that are made between my recording this and the release of the final version of the software will just be more new features, new functions, and more goodness. So let's jump into the editor timeline, and we'll start taking a look at what's new in HitFilm Pro. With HitFilm Pro for 2018, FX Home has released the most significant update to the software since its initial release. I'm not kidding. When a new version of HitFilm comes out, users of older versions will sometimes ask me if they should upgrade. And usually in that case, we'll go over a list of the new features, we'll discuss what that artist is doing, and determine whether or not they need to upgrade to the newest version of HitFilm. This time the answer is upgrade to the newest version of HitFilm. This is a game changer. Why? Here we are in the editor timeline. I'm going to go ahead and grab any random effect. I'll drag a color balance to this video clip, and I'll move over to the controls panel. And in the controls panel, there's this icon that says Display Timeline. And when you click on this, a little sub-window will open up in your controls panel. And what this is for is keyframing. So here, with this color balance effect applied to this video clip, in the editor timeline, I can now activate keyframing. And I'll just make a couple of random changes to the shadows, and I'll move forward, and I'll invert those changes. And when I scrub the editor timeline, you can see that the shadow values are changing with the color balance effect. Keyframing in the editor timeline is a massively significant upgrade. This is something that users have been asking for several iterations of the software. You have a full set of keyframing controls over here. You can even open up the value graph. It might take a while to get used to having a kind of a sub-timeline open up in the controls panel. This might require changing the way you've got your panels laid out on screen. This is a massively powerful upgrade. It really is the game changer. Now in the editor timeline, you can also keyframe transform properties like anchor point, position, scale, rotation, and opacity. This makes it a lot easier to do picture-in-picture effects and other simple animations directly in your editor timeline. This is not a replacement for the composite shot paradigm. Anything that requires 3D, anything that needs complex animation is still going to be done in a composite shot timeline. But this really opens up the editor timeline for a lot more editing effects. It really just is going to change the way that people work in the software. I cannot stress how important an update this really is, just for this one feature alone. So let's talk about some of the other new features. Let's discuss all the new tools for 360 video. I've got a 360 video clip that I ripped off of YouTube loaded into my editor timeline. I'm going to come up to the Workspaces menu, and I'm going to activate this new 360-degree viewer panel. I've gone ahead and moved the 360-degree viewer panel over here into the same panel as the trimmer window. It's just there so that you can always view your edit in 360 degrees and just grab and pan the camera around at any time. There's a drop down, so you can always look forward, backward, down. So for those of you who work in 360-degree video, this is going to be a massively useful tool. Let me go into the composite shot I've created with this same clip in there. And we'll go to the effects panel into the 360-degree video effects. Previous versions of HitFilm only had this 360-degree viewer control, which was to allow you to use an environment wrap or a 360-degree video as a background inside HitFilm's normal 3D space. a 360-degree video transform filter, which would allow you to place and deform 2D elements within 3D space, and the 360-degree text tool for placing text inside your 360-degree video. So all of these other filters are brand new to HitFilm Express for 2018. Things like animated lasers, 360-degree blurs, 360-degree bulges, channel blurs, fisheye, fractal noise, glow, glow darks, light sword, magnify, neon path. This is a highly useful suite of effects, not only for 360-degree video, but even for people working in normal 2D windowed video. For example, if one were to go back to this channel's HitFilm Effects Lab on creating planets, we used fractal noise to generate custom textures which were wrapped onto a sphere. But a large part of that episode was talking about ways of overcoming the seams in the fractal noise so we could rotate all the way around our planet without there being a seam. 360-degree fractal noise would be great for making sphere planets. I'm sure you'll find lots of uses for these 360-degree effects other than 360-degree video. The next thing we look at is probably going to be a little bit controversial. I like the feature. I'm not 100% certain I like the way it's been implemented yet. In prior versions of HitFilm, at the lower left corner of the viewer window was an icon for toggling viewer options. By clicking and holding this icon, a pop-up menu would appear, letting you toggle lights, shadows, reflections, motion blur, and depth of field. These controls have been expanded and made more powerful. Let's move up to the File menu and then go into the Options menu. And in the Options menu, you'll see this new tab for Quality Profiles. In the Quality Profiles menu, you have options for Fastest, Quick, Draft, and Final. And for each of these, you can set 2D effects, lights, shadows, reflections, motion blur, and depth of field to be off or on. So once you've defined your quality profiles, how do you access them? They've been moved from the lower left of the viewer to the upper right of the viewer and are now part of the Options drop-down menu. In the Options drop-down menu, you'll see that you can now set a playback quality and a paused quality. You can also set a playback resolution and a paused resolution automatically. This is great for tuning your system for maximum smoothness when working in your editing timeline. At the moment, in this composite shot, my playback quality is set to quick, and my paused quality is set to final. My paused resolution is set to full, while my playback resolution is set to quarter. This composite shot has a high-resolution 3D model, a couple of lights, and a couple of eyeballs made using sphere effects. And as we drag the playhead through, we can see that the playback is a little bit laggy because we've got a lot of things going on. But with our quality profiles customized to be quick playback quality and quarter resolution, when I hit play, you can see that my lights immediately go away and that my resolution changes to quarter. The eyes themselves are unaffected because the sphere effect is a 2D effect, not a 3D model. If I change my options so that my playback quality is fastest, then pretty much everything goes away. The sphere effect is a 2D effect, which is no longer being rendered. There are fractal noise effects, glows, and lightnings that were making up the eye texture. This fastest playback option is turning off all 2D effects, which means the eyeball reverts to the flat masked planes that make up its base. This fastest playback quality setting, as configured with no 2D effects, isn't going to be particularly useful for animators, but it'll be great in the editor timeline when you're just previewing footage that's been cut together. I'm going to set this back quick. These custom quality profiles and the options to set different quality and resolution when playing back or paused are great ways to speed up and customize your HitFilm workflow. However, I don't particularly like that being moved up to this options menu and wish that playback quality, playback resolution, paused quality, and paused resolution, and this color bit depth, which affects the viewer window but not your output render, had been left in this icon in the lower left corner of the viewer panel. Why? Your mileage may vary, but I'm usually moving from my timeline to my effects list to my controls panel, and that leaves most of my mouse travel in this kind of triangle working in this area of the screen. Having the viewer quality icon here in the lower left-hand corner of the viewer would keep these options within my workflow area, moving from the timeline to these panels. Moving these options to the upper right hand of the viewer window just kind of places them a little bit out of the way for my workflow. It's a little bit inconvenient. I'm sure as I continue working in the newest version of HitFilm Pro, this will become second nature to me, but right now, I do wish these new powerful options had been left in their original location. As long as I'm here, we'll look at a couple of miscellaneous features. I'm going to right-click this right eyeball composite shot and call up the context menu. The right-click context menu in composite shots has been updated. These transform options, fit to frame width, fit to frame height, and center in frame, were previously active only in the editor timeline. So what do? Well, I'll drag in this photo quickly. This photo is not the same size or the same aspect ratio as our current composite shot timeline. And by right-clicking and using this transform menu, I can very quickly scale this to fill the frame completely without preserving its original aspect ratio, or I can change this to fit to the frame width, or the frame height. And of course, to quickly recenter this in the frame. Let me right-click on the right eyeball composite shot layer, and I'm going to select Copy. Then I'll come up to New Layer, and I'll create a new plane very quickly. I'm going to right-click on this new plane 3, and I'm going to select Paste Attributes. The new Paste Attributes function quickly lets me choose to copy any attached effects or transform properties on the layer that's currently sitting in the copy buffer. That new plane is sitting right on top of this right eyeball. I'll delete that and go back down to the right eyeball, right-click again, and point out another new feature. Remove Effects and Remove Attributes. So if I remove the effects from the right eyeball layer, they're gone. The sphere effect that turned this texture into an eyeball is immediately removed, taking me back to the base layer. I'll undo that, right-click again, and click Remove Attributes. Right-clicking Remove Attributes gives you a menu choosing which effects and attributes to remove. Again, this is just another way of speeding up your workflow and media management. There have been changes in the masking tools as well. We're in a texture comp for an eyeball. I have this new plane 1 layer selected, which is masking my pupil. And with my pupil selected, and with the mask selected, and the selection tool selected, I can now move the mask by holding down a cursor key. In this case, I'm holding down the right cursor key. Let me undo that and grab the pen tool. I've clicked on this point, making it the active point, and I'll move the mouse away and use the cursor keys to adjust the mask point. Using cursor keys instead of the mouse to adjust mask points is great for fine adjustments. Masks in general have been improved with this version of HitFilm. Creating and altering complex masks is just faster in general. Input in the time ruler has been improved as well. In prior versions of HitFilm, HitFilm was very particular about the data input format. You needed to input exactly 2 digits for each field, and you needed to specifically use colon or semicolons to input data, or it just wouldn't work. With the new version, HitFilm's a lot smarter about it. So if I just enter 5.0, HitFilm will figure out that I want to go to 5 seconds. It's a little change, but one that'll make a lot of people very happy. Next, we'll take a look at some of the new features that are available for text and motion graphics. This composite shot has a simple 3D plane with some fractal noise texture on it. and a simple text object with no effects on it. The text has been set to 50% gray. There is one light in the scene, and that light is casting shadows. HitFilm Pro 2017 did add reflections to the material properties for text and planes. HitFilm for 2018 adds ambient occlusion for text layers, which just helps these two computer-generated elements blend together a little bit better. I brought this photograph into the composite shot, and I'm going to go ahead and hide that again. Select my text layer, go back into its material settings, and here's something new: Environment Map. Now I can use the composite shot or an individual layer, in this case that photo of the Golden Gate Bridge, as an environment map directly on the text object. And if I turn the diffuse lighting down and turn the specular lighting up, that should strengthen that reflection a bit. You can now see that the gray text is picking up some of the oranges and the blues from this photo. I can also change the specular and diffuse reflectivity. This works for text the same way it works for 3D models. So if I turn up the diffuse reflectivity, it'll pick up even more of the colors from my environment map image. I'll just turn the environment map off so you can see what a difference that really made. The next sexy and exciting thing for text is this folder here in the effects filter called Geometry. Geometry currently has three options: bevel, extrude, and rotate. Notice in this version of HitFilm it says text and shape layers. Right now it only works on text. Since you're seeing this after the official version has been released, this might not say shape layers anymore, or shape layers may be something that's going to come to a future version of HitFilm Pro. I don't know. But for now, think of these effects as text-only enhancements. First, I'll drop an extrude on our new text layer. I've turned off reflections for the moment just to speed this up, but I've taken the extrude from the geometry effect up to 460 pixels. Previous versions of HitFilm had the 3D extrusion effect, and the 3D extrusion effect is still here in the effects menu. The major difference between the classic 3D extrusion effect and the new geometry extrude is the old 3D extrusion effect was fake 3D. It was drawing the image of a 3D extruded layer onto a 2D plane, but it was still a 2D drawing, and it did not cast shadows on itself or on other objects in the scene correctly. This new geometry extrude effect is turning this new text object into a full 3D object. You can see it's casting shadows on itself and on the ground plane. This would not happen if I swapped out the geometry extrude effect for a classic 3D extrusion. So you can see the shadow is still being cast on the ground plane by the text itself, but only the flat front face of the text is having the shadow cast. The fake extruded geometry is not reading on the floor plane. When I turn off the 3D extrusion and turn on the geometry extrude, boom, full 3D shadows. Let's take a look at this bevel effect. Bevel does what it says on the box. It adds beveling to your text, either outside or inside, and you can adjust the expansion. Again, this is just another way to change the look of your text in the new version of HitFilm. Extrusion and bevel can be combined. I'll turn off extrude for now, and I'll just grab this rotate. With the geometry rotate, you can keyframe the X, Y, and Z rotation, and I'll just change the Y rotation to 20 degrees. So what this rotation effect is doing is rotating each letter individually, not just the entire layer. It's just another option to make your title and text effects in HitFilm that much better. There are several other new effects in HitFilm Pro. We'll take a look at some of them right now. Here's that picture of the Golden Gate Bridge again, and I'll turn on the new block displacement effect. Block displacement breaks your image up into a mosaic and displaces it. There are all kinds of effects you can change here. The seed of the blocks, block size, placement amount, the coverage, entire frame if you want to leave holes in, whether or not all the blocks are displaced. Only half of your blocks are displaced. You can change the aspect ratio of each block. So this is just another fun one for backgrounds and MoGraph artists. Another new effect is dot matrix. Breaks your image up into, well, dots. And then there's just a whole bunch of things that you can do to oh, really? Hey, I didn't even know I could do that. There's just a whole bunch of ways of tweaking the appearance of this. I haven't really played with this dot matrix effect as much as I should have, but just looking at it, these... what kinds of things we could do with that? Okay. And then the last effect is a pixel sort effect. This just... I really don't have any idea what the pixel sort is supposed to be doing, but it does do very neat looks. I'm sure as people play around with the pixel sort, they'll figure out what it's supposed to do, and when you do, tell me. I'm going to turn on the top layer. On the top layer, I have this dancer. She's been chroma keyed out of her background. And on her, I've got this new clone effect. Right now, it's set up to make 3 clones. Let me change this position from 1920 to -200. There we go. Now we can see what this does. I can rotate the entire array. I can set a rotation offset so that each clone rotates farther and farther. There's a scale offset, so the clones get smaller as they recede into the distance. There's a time offset. There's a mirror version, so we can clone in both directions. I will oscillate these frames, and I can even change the blend mode. Normal, add, lighten, screen. So this could be used on any animation, maybe for text layers, not necessarily just on footage. But again, that's just I can see this being useful, well, to create clones if you do have green screen footage, and I can see this being used to create all kinds of, again, titling and animation effects. This could probably be used to duplicate spaceships, explosions, lasers, lightsabers, full text object. It's just a quicker way of making clones than copying out other layers. In some ways, this is similar to the echo and motion trail effects from earlier versions of HitFilm, but it's a lot more powerful. You guys have been asking for it, and in 2018, HitFilm Pro is going to add it. Here's that puppet warp. The puppet warp basically breaks a 2D photo layer up into a tessellated mesh. You can set a certain amount of control points, as well as adjust the fineness of the mesh. Determine the number of control points, place them in your object, and then once that's done, you can toggle over to the animate mode, and moving the control points allows you to kind of deform the animated mesh in real time. This could be used on photos to subtly change somebody's expression. This could be used on a video layer. Perhaps you've shot a green screen of somebody who's supposed to be flying, but they're just standing on the ground. You could quickly use the puppet warp to point their feet out to hide the fact that they're standing on the ground. Or, if in the future you see a dancing animated HitFilm University logo, you know what tool I use to create it. HitFilm users have been asking for expressions for quite some time now, and with HitFilm 2018, we still don't have them. But there's an entirely new class of filter called behaviors, and right now there are only 2 of them: mix parent position and rotate by layer. but I'm certain the developers are going to add more in the future. So let's take a look at how we can use these behaviors. In this composite shot, I've deleted all the animation keyframes for the eyeball on the left, while leaving the animation keyframes for the eyeball on the right. I'm going to grab this left eye X tilt point, and I'm going to drag the rotate by layer behavior to it. And if I select the right eye X tilt and change X amount rotation to 100%, then the left eye now moves up and down at the same time as the right eye. I could change this from 100% to 200%, and now the left eyeball will rotate on the x-axis twice as much as the right eyeball. I could change this to a value like 300. And now the left eye is moving in the opposite direction of the right eye, and much more. I'll change this from -300 back to 100, grab the left eye Y pan, and grab the rotate by layer and drag that onto that. I'll select the right eye Y pan layer, set the rotation Y amount to 100, and now both of my eyeballs move at the same time. This means if I want to change the animation for both layers, I no longer have to worry about animating the left eye. I can just animate the right eyeball, and the left eyeball will follow along. I'll open up the transform properties for the right eye's X tilt. And as I start adjusting X rotation, you can see that the left eye is following all the way along. I'll add the mix parent position behavior to the left eye's X tilt layer as well. What does this do? Well, it lets me select another layer, say the right eye X tilt layer, and mix its position with that of the right eye X tilt point. At 100%, left eye will always be in the exact location of the right eye, whereas if I set this to 50%, and then start moving the right eye X tilt around, the left eye's position is offset 50% from where it was set to wherever the right eye has been moved. With both the mix parent position and rotate by layer behaviors, I encourage experimentation, but these are both going to be great and useful tools for adding complex animation to HitFilm scenes more easily. Another important thing added to the new version of HitFilm 2018 is the new audio compressor. I'm going to play this looped section back quickly, or do something else with it. Oh no. Hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. As you can see, here was a section where I was speaking somewhat quietly, very quietly, then I got louder again. We'll drag the compressor onto this clip and talk about what that does. An audio compressor reduces the gain of a waveform when it rises above a set threshold amount. When the audio waveform level rises above the threshold, the ratio determines how squished future volume transients are. The knee, attack time, and release time are used to control how quickly and harshly the compressor cuts in and out, and the output gain is used to boost the final output. So if I take this threshold down to -32 and set the ratio to 4, then anything above -32 dB will be squished by a ratio of 4:1. 32 over 4 is 8. So I've effectively reduced the dynamic range of the top 32 decibels of my audio signal to 8. This has had the effect of muting or quieting the sound. Do something else with it. Oh no. Hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. This means I could do about 24 decibels of gain. I'll do 23 to boost that back up. That's probably too much. Make that gain 18. Do something else with it. I don't know. Hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Or do something else with it. That's better. I don't know. So one more time, we'll compare the uncompressed, or do something else with it. Oh no. Hope you've enjoyed this, or do something else with it. I don't know. Hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. So the compressor's there to equalize the differences in volume levels. If you're doing narration or voiceover, really it's an essential tool for smoothing out the overall levels of your voice. It's not the final step in your audio editing, it's usually pretty much the first step. The best thing to do would be to drop in a noise reduction right before the compressor. Or do something else with it. I don't know. Hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. With the addition of the compressor to HitFilm's audio effects, HitFilm Pro now has the full suite of essential audio effects needed to do almost any mixing task. This doesn't even begin to cover all the new features in HitFilm Pro for 2018. Besides what we've already discussed about, they've changed the way that 2D points and 3D points interact, so when using a 2D effect like lens flare, you can select a 3D point and the effect in the software maps that 3D point to 2D space to put your lens flare in the right position. This works for any 2D point layer when parenting to a 3D point or layer, and will be useful for mapping loads of different effects. General timeline editing has been improved. Opening composite shots, deleting layers, cutting, pasting keyframes, keyword filtering, duplicating layers, composite shot scrubbing are all faster. There's now support for Asian characters and text layers. Holding down the Shift key now locks Bezier control movements to the time axis and the value graphs and sequence envelopes. Curve segments can now be manipulated directly with the mouse. Hovering over and editing graph curves and keyframes displays tooltips. There have been speed improvements with loading media, creating cache files, generating previews. Motion blur has been added to the editor timeline. You can now import ProRes video on the PC using a custom import kernel without the need to install QuickTime. HDR images can be imported to use as environment maps. You can set the default audio and video preview size to large. You can now type in the time ruler in the viewer, trimmer, and layer panels. And that's just what's been added in the pre-release version. I'm sure the final version will have even more new effects and features added into the software. The next thing we're going to discuss is something that'll probably be controversial in the community. FX Home is changing the release schedule and the pricing model for HitFilm. We've already discussed how with this version, HitFilm Pro is just HitFilm Pro, without a year number or a version number. HitFilm Pro is now going to ship by itself and will no longer contain HitFilm Ignite Pro. Ignite Pro should remain available as a separate product, but by no longer bundling Ignite with HitFilm itself, this will give FX Home the opportunity to cut the price. I don't know what the new price is going to be, but it should be cheaper. Additionally, FX Home is moving to, I don't want to call this a subscription model, but I want to call this a licensing model. When you purchase HitFilm Pro in the future, FX Home will give users 12 months of updates and support from their initial purchase. HitFilm 3, HitFilm 4, and HitFilm 2017 all had 9 updates over the course of the year, so there were a total of 10 versions of the software over their lifespan. So this is pretty good. But what this means is that someone who buys HitFilm Pro in August isn't going to get left out by a new version in November. In fact, by moving to this 12 months of upgrades plan, this frees FX Home from full version upgrades. I believe what they'll do now is introduce new, exciting, or larger features as soon as they've been completed by the development team, rather than waiting for an artificial release deadline for a new version. Again, I want to stress, this is not a subscription model like Adobe. When you're buying HitFilm Pro, you're buying 12 months of updates, and then your updates stop. You will no longer get the next version of HitFilm. But the most recent version of HitFilm you've downloaded will remain activated on your computer, and you're free to continue using this. It's kind of like buying the software with a little bit more variance in when your updates stop. But if you decide to purchase for a year and then take a year or two off and then buy another year's worth of updates, you have the option of doing that while continuing to use your older version of the software. So, while there are some people in the community who won't like this, I actually think this is a great move for FX Home. Incidentally, it's what I've been saying Adobe should have done for the last 4 years. So with the change of the pricing and release schedule, and with these new features, particularly with the upgrades to the editor timeline with keyframing and animation there, this really is the most significant update to HitFilm since the software's initial release. As I said at the beginning of this walkthrough, this time, you should just upgrade now. I'd like to thank you for sitting through this rather long walkthrough of some of the new features in HitFilm Pro. I'm Mike Miller with Tri-M Visual, and I'll see you next time.